just to give the first few words, maybe as an introduction for the first 5 minutes, waiting for people to get online. I know we had people, that were planning to connect from as early as 6 a.m. In Perth right now to late in the evening on the East Coast. So it's always a pleasure to have the traditional audience from Embellie Advisory. As you know, we do a series of webinars on the extractive sectors and sustainable development, and we do this monthly. But we thought about also doing a specific series of country per country analysis. So this is the first opus of the country series, starting with Ecuador, obviously in interesting jurisdictions in terms of developing mining projects, and the timeliness is good because the elections are obviously coming in 10 days. So I think there might be a series of questions that I will ask obviously to my fellow panelists, and thank you very much for being here. I will introduce you in just 1 second, but I just want to reinforce the fact that this is a webinar that needs to be as interactive as possible. We welcome any questions, any comments. We're happy to try to address them directly, and I know that you're all going on Easter vacation afterwards, or you're already for some of you on Easter vacation, so I appreciate you joining. So joining me for this webinar, I have a panel of distinguished speakers, and some of them I know for a very long time. But we have right now, you have Olivia Gamache, first of all. Sorry, I just point at you right now, which is a VP Environment and Communities at Adventus Mining, with a series of interesting projects in Ecuador. We also have Stevie Gamboa, who's my go-to guy usually when I want to have information on mining reforms and mining law, and that will help us set the stage in terms of what is the current situation in Ecuador, especially in terms of the elections and what we might actually see for the next coming years. We have Carolina Orozco, and I really thank you, Carolina, for joining us. I know you have a little fever for the last few days, so I very much appreciate that you are joining us, and everybody knows Carolina's expertise on especially environmental regulations, and I work with a series of communities, with a series of mining companies in Ecuador. And Federico Velasquez, that I had the pleasure to meet a few times at Solaris, and he's especially probably going to tell us more on the way that Solaris, especially at the Warinsa project, works with communities, and his views on Ecuador as a mining jurisdiction, and inclusion of mining as a sector into a larger development of mining territory. So again, thank you very much for all of you for being here. I might maybe just turn first to Stevie, as I was mentioning. Obviously, we know about Arauz facing Lasso in the second round of elections, but you are in Guayaquil. You'll be following specifically this election. Can you maybe help me set the stage in terms of what are the key topics during the campaign on mining, and what we can see in case Arauz win, which is likely, or Lasso, and your views on Ecuador for the next few years? And you're on mute, Stevie.
Sorry about that, guys. That's what always happens when they're first one to express. Well, thank you so much for having us, Remy, and hello to everyone. Hello, Federico, Carolina, Olivia, and everybody that is watching us. Thank you for your time, and thank you for being interested in having the next hour listening about Ecuador. We used to be the new hot thing, and hopefully we can become one again. And it depends. In a major issue will depend about the political campaign that is just about to finish. So it will be a very interesting issue to develop today. Well, just to get a big picture for this, we have two candidates right now. Well, we have been changing their mind, at least the way they spoke about the extractive industries during this campaign. And this particularly will be a sensitive issue, because at the beginning, we thought both of them, and actually both of them, have publicly expressed their support to the mining industry. And both of them has acknowledged its favorable impact on the economy. That's the big news for this matter. However, during the last 2 months, they have mutated their discourse in confusing, for us at least, directions, such as supporting popular consultations that seek to prohibit the activity, or suggesting the development of national impact projects to sectorize options. That's something that will be probably seen from the outside a little bit far. We understand, particularly I do understand, that they are trying to get all the votings that they can. So it's a good time to be talking about environmental issues, to be talking about minorities' rights and everything. The thing is, once you do that in this stage of the campaign, whoever wins will have to face that commitment in the near future, and that will be probably a big step in a big stop for the industry to decide to continue the investment they're doing right now. Oh, well, the most important thing that we're hoping for both of them is that the one who arrives to the new government has a clear vision of the positive impact that mining is already having in the Ecuadorian economy. And that's a big thing. Not only it has been the sector that has brought the highest foreign investment for the last 2 years in a row, not only has exponentially grown the tax collection, the collection for the government, not only has created thousands of new jobs and has already been given thousands of jobs for the last 10 years. But there are also another kind of information that the mining sector is provided to the government that the government did not even have, related to social issues and environmental information that mining companies are getting for the territory that the government has no idea that it exists. For that on, what we are hoping in the new government to come is for them to understand that the mining sector, what the mining sector will need is not major reforms in the regulatory framework. There are at least two things that has been delayed for the last not 5, but probably 10 years. That is probably the most important things that the mining sector has to bring to the table and has to force the new government to discuss and to approve. One of them has been already mentioned in Guillermo Lasso presentations in the media, and it is related about the previous consultation law. The Ecuadorian constitution requires to make a previous consultation process. It happens not only in Ecuador, it happens in Colombia, in Peru, and there's no law to regulate it. And that's definitely a big issue for us. We need a previous consultation law that brings transparency for the process of the participation, so each company is not forced to do it the best way they understand, and the government has a ruling that can be forced in the near future. So that's probably one of the items that we need to force the new government to discuss and approve a previous consultation law. But the other one is a royalty law or a mining tax law. And the thing is, the communities and the territories does not feel that the income that the government is receiving from the mining sector is becoming a real measurable benefit for those territories and those communities. And that's a big issue for them, because you understand, and probably the whole panel will be talking about this. If the communities doesn't feel that the mining sector is bringing real benefits to them, they will not feel close. They will not feel empathy for the mining companies and for the mining growth. And that's why we will be working the next 4 years, whoever wins the race, to force them to create a royalty law. If it's not a royalty law, a mining tax law that would include directly assignation of economic resources to local governments, to local entities, to protection of the environment, and to fulfill the requirements of the social participation that will be found in the previous consultation law.
You mentioned a few points which I think are interesting. I mean, obviously the question of prior consultation, and I remember we actually worked on a specific on the previous webinar on the specificities of prior consultation in Ecuador as a comparison with Peru and other countries, for example, as how to implement this. But you mentioned very quickly, understand, Arauz and Lasso, but there's the presence of obviously the third and fourth candidates, two candidates actually that got 16-17%, especially one, Yaku Guartambel, who's very opposed to mining. How does that will that impact the political landscape in Ecuador in the sense of potential vision of the mining sector from the communities? And then I'll probably reach out to Carolina afterwards.
Well, that's one part of the issues that this final round will bring to the table. We have two other candidates that are no longer in the race, but who rise as new stars. They are bright new politicians, really. One is Yaku Perez, that is an activist that has always been against extractive industries. And the other one is Herbas, who has run for the democratic left, the left party, but it's really has really caught the attention of the young people. He's the one who has been producing and using social media to promote his image. Both of them, if you put them together, the voting they received, they got more than 35% of the voting. That's a lot if you consider that even Arauz, who arrived first, didn't get that amount of votes. But I don't think they will have a very lasting image in the near future. I think one is a rising star and will be forget as far as he was considered. That will be the happens to Herbas, and Jaco Perez will be forgotten as a radical activist, and he will become a more mature politician. So I don't think he will be has a big impact in this election, but I think he will be one of the most serious contenders for the next 4 years.
Okay, no, very interesting. And turning to Carolina, when we talk about the acceptation of mining projects and mining as a sector by communities, I mean, I've been with each of you almost, in Ecuador several times. I was in Zamora, Chinchipe, Morona, Santiago, Azuay, late last year. And you can sense that even if there are projects that have been, quite successful for Terra Norte in the immediate vicinity, there's clearly an understanding, at least in part of the population, of the positive impact of mining. There are in overall, especially in Azuay, in Morona, Santiago, in Loja also to a certain extent, you have a resentment towards mining. How do you explain this, and what are the roles, and main concerns from communities in Ecuador? I mean, obviously that's a very soft ball towards, but some people might not know exactly of the specifics of Ecuador, and how can we actually work towards, having a more integrated vision of how mining can be inside a larger inclusive development, strategies for some of those territories. Carolina, if you can.
Okay, thank you, and hello everyone. Well, the main difference here in Ecuador, for example, I would say that is we don't have like a social license or a social regulation. Okay, we only have an environmental one, and inside the environmental one, the only thing that Ecuador says is when you do your environmental management plan for your environmental license, you have to put some activities you would like to share or do with the communities, and that's all. Besides the consultation and all that stuff, we don't have really regulated this space for the communities. So who does it? The companies that are responsible. And here I would like to do some emphasis and be very clear. To accomplish the regulation doesn't mean that you are responsible. It's that you are legal because you have to accomplish, because you are here in Ecuador and you do have to work beside the regulation from the country you are in. But once you start seeing farther than the policies and the regulation, then you start being responsible, and then you can start talking about being sustainable. For example, one of the things from my point of view that has happened in these places like Cuenca, as you said, Azuay and other parts of the country, now in Babura, now in Machada, Santa Rosa, it's the misinformation. Maybe the sector, the mining sector, I mean, doesn't has applied the correct strategy, the communication strategy, because as you know, mining sector is difficult. It's a very technical sector, so it is difficult to translate to a kind of language that anyone can understand, but it's not impossible. We can do it. But I think the government and the companies has made a bigger effort, but the government hasn't done this work, the specific work to inform people about what is mining, and that we are very different, for example, than the illegal mining. This confusion is the thing that has made a lot of problems here in Ecuador. In Cuenca is a specific problem. There are a lot of people and activists that are involved in. I don't know if we are all aware, but in Cuenca, we have made a consultation. The country had made a consultation, and yes, we don't want any mining here, has won. And I think it was a very good strategy from the activists. It's not only a misinformation from the sector, it's also this strategy. So what do I read here? The companies have to have a very strong strategy, not only with information and communication strategy, also with sustainable activities. For example, if some company has the permits, it doesn't mean that you are allowed to go in field and start the activities. If you go and talk to people and explain them about what you are going to do in field, it doesn't mean that you are allowed. So what do you have to do? You have to create a whole strategy with the permits, the environmental regulation, and the communities. And for example, being sustainable is going further than accomplishing it. For example, if you can see in a whole process of the timeline of your project, for example, in initial exploration or for the moment for advanced exploration, because almost every concession of the 275 concessions that were given from since October 2016 are going to advanced exploration now. So if you make a timeline and you say, this is my activities I'm going to do for the next 4, 5, or 6 years, you will have to discover how any or all of these activities are going to have a positive impact, because all the negative impacts you have already discovered in the environmental impact study, and you have already said to the government, I'm going to apply all of these activities to minimize those impacts, and you already have license, or you have a register, you have any permit, but you already have discovered the negative impacts. The thing is, the regulation doesn't tell the companies, okay, you have to also discover the favorite or the positive impacts for people, and you will have to go and inform people in field. So companies have to work on it. We have to discover of each activity I'm going to do in this timeline, I'm going to have to create the positive impact of what I'm doing, and I hope I'm going to have to expand, not only inform, and also link these activities, for example, to the sustainable goals, the sustainable development goals. So it's not only being here and working under the framework or the politics of Ecuador, we have to link it to the international movement. Why? Because as I said, here in Ecuador, we don't have any regulation for social aspect, but we do have in the international framework. So we would have to attach those things, and then we will be like a sustainable company. Just to tell you an example, Remy, if we go and we plant some trees, usually companies are obligated to do this in their environmental license, okay? Every company has to do it. But how different would this be if I report to the government, okay, I'm gonna plant 1,000 plants or trees. But if we look for the positive impact of this, we would say, I'm planting 1,000 trees, that this means X percentage of reduction of the CO2 equivalent tons. And this would mean, for example, 30,000 hectares of restoring the ecosystems. And this would also mean work for the people. And this will also mean cleaning the water, because the plants are being planted beside the rivers and stuff like that. We have enough activities of the mining sector, but the only thing we have to do is attach them and try to create, not to create, but to inform and advise for the positive impact that we are doing.
So yes, you're mentioning obviously, best practices in environmental risk mitigation, or, calculation of decarbonization and using, the reforestation plan to offset potential loss in terms of carbon monoxide capture. And what's interesting is I agree that those best practices exist and there are good companies operating in Ecuador. And I was going to make my transition to Olivia just after. But the fact that there's maybe in communicating of those achievements, of this capacity of the mining sector, things I've seen for several years or decades in Peru, or more recently in Colombia, work that has been done. It's true that maybe the capacity to communicate this at the level of government, or maybe different organizations, professional organization, is lacking in Ecuador. And on the specific level of the property itself, being able to showcase the positive externalities of mining, explaining how this actually is integrated into the mapping of the SDGs to the mining sector or to the future of the mining territory, is something that I feel sometimes Ecuador is a little bit lagging behind compared to the other jurisdictions, neighboring jurisdictions, and with an impact of a lack of acceptation of those projects. And I love that, you know, when Olivia actually agreed to be on this panel, we actually had exactly that same conversation when we were talking about, you know, communication tools and different, you know, platforms and digital platforms for participation. And we use Citizen Lab. You had mentioned your Bang the Table, which is an Australian version of it, but those tools are actually very powerful in being able to communicate some of the best practices. And maybe Olivia, if I can, you know, use that as a transition towards you. I know as VP Environment at Adventus, I mean, those issue of impact on water and other environmental externalities, this is something that you work on a daily basis. What is, according to you, the main concerns that you hear from communities, and how do you at Adventus, you know, try to explain the impact and the real impact that mining can have, and also the opportunities that you can have on other SDGs, such as, you know, governance, you know, economic diversification through local content, social performance, and other similar topics?
Yeah. So first, thanks very much for having me here, Remy. So I agree with what Carolina said. There's really often in these jurisdictions, there's really limited guidance on social performance and how to execute or how to incorporate social considerations into the EIA. So one of the things, one of the most powerful tools out there right now would be the IFC performance standards under the Equator Principles, which can give a lot of, we're using them right now as part of our EIA, and I know a number of countries companies in Ecuador are using them as well as kind of the standard. And there's a lot of tools within the IFC performance standards to address these gaps that Carolina mentioned. Some of the things that might be missing around, say, biodiversity within the local legislation, there's lots of guidance within the performance standards. Also, the community's use of resources and how do you incorporate ecosystem services into your evaluation of environmental impacts. So that's kind of one of the tools that could be used to fill that gap right now. While we don't have a regulation within Ecuador, and I would consider that to be one of the best practices that's out there. And then I guess the other thing to mention is the link between environment and social in Ecuador is so close. They're so closely tied to each other that we almost have to consider all aspects of environmental impacts to be social risks and potentially an impact to your social license, whether it's soil or the top one that we see, and we're obviously not alone, is water. So anything having to do with water, whether it's impact on water quality, changes to surface water availability, changes to groundwater, and not just within the concession. The other thing I've seen, or that I hear more about from a local regulation perspective, is very concession based. So what's the impact within your concession? And so I'm always talking to my team in the field about, you can't just think about it as what's within your concession or what impact are you having within your concession, because from a social perspective, that doesn't exist. And so really broadening the area of influence and looking at anything downstream. And from a risk perspective, also remembering that real impact versus perceived impact, and making sure that we're considering what could be a perceived impact that's way outside of our area of influence could really affect that social license. So obviously really complicated, lots of things to consider, but a lot of, like I said, when we look at the IFC performance standards and how those are laid out, and they're also pretty well aligned with the SDGs, it provides a really good framework and lots of guidance on how to make sure that you're incorporating and considering all of these complex ideas.
No, and I agree. And when you look at, when including mapping the SDG to the mining sector, there are, specifically on the issue of water, there are a few best practices that, we're part of the Dev and Change Initiative, giving workshops in terms of specific issues in mining. We just did it in Peru on how to integrate water and mining in Peru. That could be actually very, very useful. I will forward you the information on this. But I know that you actually are, before I turn to Federico, looking at interaction with communities specifically. I mean, you have 11 communities, if I'm not wrong, around your main project. I think you're initiating the process into discussing with them and continuing to this. That'd be interesting to get your feedback of how you communicate, because obviously we talk about the scientific data, the framework of analysis, but all these are very far away from sometimes community actors. How do you actually interact with your communities in terms of communication? And I probably will have the same question for Federico after, especially with the Shroud community. Yes.
Yeah, so that's complicated too. We tend to use social media a lot nowadays, especially with COVID, but we've found that social media is okay in our urban centers around the area of influence, but doesn't really work in the rural. So that's a big limitation.
Bring me a coffee, you think?
And then the other challenge is around literacy and ability to, if we do put out social media posts, or if we do create flyers or information, even presentations, we try and put as many pictures as possible, but the feedback that we are constantly getting feedback from our communities and from our employees, who are mostly local, they don't understand. Stevie, I think, and Carolina both alluded to this, that it's a complex sector. It's really complicated to explain to someone, even who has an education, even if it's not in mining, if they have a post-secondary education. And so explaining these ideas is a constant challenge. So we're in the field face to face a lot with people, trying to use social media where we can, but recognizing its limitations.
And very, very interesting. And maybe a little bit further along the line of community engagement is the Warinsa project. And Federico, I think you have your coffee now. Can you maybe...
Not quite yet. Not quite yet. She's coming though. She's coming with it.
Perfect. Can you maybe give us? I followed a little bit of what your work that you did, especially in Morro de Santiago, and the engagement that you have with communities. Can you actually explain how you operate in that jurisdiction, and especially with Shroud communities? Because obviously each project is very unique, and each community is unique, but you have a situation which is quite similar to others in project in Morro de Santiago, Samarachi, and Chipe, maybe different from Imbabura, but that's interesting to get this take also.
Thank you, Remy. And again, thank you very much for having us in this panel. Olivia, very nice to meet you, and Carolina, Stevie, always a pleasure to actually just be sharing ideas with you guys. Indeed, I'm Federico Velasquez. I'm the VP of Operations for Solaris Resources. My area of expertise is corporate affairs and operations. And for the past 2 years, we've been working on establishing a project in Ecuador called Warinsa. And as part of that, we did a number of laptop studies and also field studies to understand the complexity of indigenous issues in Latin America. This is an area of personal passion, and I've worked on this matter in other continents, including Canada, with the government of British Columbia. So it was actually quite interesting to resonate a lot of the different similarities that have actually been able to be evidenced, and the approaches that can be strongly taken on. So I do need to point that out very clearly at the start of this small preamble, and that is the fact that we're dealing with communities that have traditional territories, have a legitimate area of acknowledgement of a territory of a land that is actually the surface land is basically owned by them. There is a complexity within that, and it's very different than what we see sometimes in the area of the highlands or the coast, where other mining companies may be dealing with different other elements. So I say that because it just wouldn't be fair to compare our approach, our elements of work with other companies, because the complexities are different. So with that in mind, we understood very well that there was an element of recognition that was certainly lacking. We as a team have acknowledged quite a few times that we're the first company in Ecuador, a Canadian company, that's acknowledged that we are working in the traditional territories of the Shuar nations of War and Senyari, and that is based on the learnings, based on the way that we as a sector work in Canada and respect those elements of traditional territories, of First Peoples and so forth. And as part of that, there was also an element of conflict there between the company and the communities because of that lack of understanding of what really having a traditional territory really meant. So with that into context, that conflict gave us an opportunity to actually really build something very special, what we call the strategic alliance. And with that in mind as well, we're trying to promote this new approach, this new model, where one thing that it can be applicable to any project in Ecuador at this point, and not only Ecuador, all throughout Latin America, is the concept of participation. Like mining has been perceived, managed, to be honest, as an entity, as an industry that would benefit the few. And sometimes many communities have been left in the dark of those benefits. I don't think it was a conscious issue. It was a conscious issue. It was just a matter of the traditional element of what mining was about and how it was handled in the past. Mm-hmm. Now we live in a society where there's better communication, better understanding, and there's been consequences of irresponsible management of resources. So we're dealing with a fair bag of loaded elements of irresponsible systems that were put into place on how to manage resources from the sector, as well as actually from government and from a different area actors that didn't really participate responsibly. And as a result of that, sorry, now I do have my coffee. Thank you, love. Appreciate it. Okay, thank you. All right, sorry about that. So with that, now we're facing with the opportunity, our last opportunity. And that is where we see Ecuador to be. I think as an industry, as many junior mining companies that have established themselves in Ecuador, have identified that this is one of the sector's last chance to get it right, to be able to collect all of the mistakes, the right things that we've done around the world, and make it work well in Ecuador. And I think there is a desire, there is a good expectation, there is a good momentum in the sense of what is being discussed, the collective understanding of what the potential is. And needless to say that obviously the market and how the demand of different commodities is becoming a reality is resonating not only on government, but is resonating on people as well. It's resonating on the understanding that, hey, oil is not going to be there. It's going to take us a while to get back to that, but we are sitting on this copper or golden chairs. We need to make proper and responsible use of them, right? And that opportunity, we just cannot let it go.
But then obviously we've seen, if you look at the Correa administration and you look at that Moreno administration, there's been this debate about the place of mining and whether or not the country should be, full on with mining, or at least, how it should be, regulated in terms of, previous consultation, being able to engage with other actors that are not only the national state actors. And maybe I'm going to use this for transition for Stevie and Carolina in terms of how do we make this happen in terms of regulations? And is it a question of increasing local content requirements? Is it a question of better communication? Is it a question of having better best practices, or at least you mentioned a series of different fiscal policies that could actually be interesting, could be implemented in the future, Stevie? What's your view on this? And to give you a little time just to think about your answer, I wanted to catch up the question on the Q&A, because I always want to take the Q&As as priority. There's a question specifically on how to use social media successfully when anti-mining interests are so well organized to be able to master the use of social media. First of all on this, and I know Olivia might have some ideas maybe for your second answer on this, there's plenty of different ways of addressing social media. There are platforms that are actually social media, but geographically restricted to your area of influence, that therefore, very much limits the capacity of external voices to, contaminate the debate and the opening participation that you have with the communities. And then obviously it's a question of, are you just giving some communication and some kind of a official communique through social media or on the website of the mining company, which communities don't trust or are not really engaged with? Or do you really have the tools for participation? And there's plenty of tools. UNICEF is promoting one, for example, to engage on question of, getting your voice heard, or being able to have decision making on some CSR investment, for example, or communicate about your own small business and others, and really unleashing the participation on a dedicated social media that is not that is just for the territory, and therefore doesn't have the intrusion of other anti-mining interests that are not well aware of what are the capacities that can be done in the area of influence. Stevie, that was a very long transition towards you, but here's my question is on, going back maybe to whether it's going at Araúz administration or Lasso administration, the type of regulations or laws or reforms that you could have in the mining sector to facilitate the success of some of those operations and the acceptation by the population, at least.
Thank you, Remy. Just let me get a little bit of ideas from what we heard before, and usually I do not agree with Carolina, but this time I will have to do partially, and I agree, of course, with Federico and with Olivia. And the thing is, of course, it's very important for a company to be active in the territory. It's very important for a company to join international measurables initiatives. It's very important to the company to be present and to try to understand how communities works, how people represent their needs, to respect them, and to make them part of the probably of the company's culture in the process. And I think that's great. But I'm the lawyer part of this process, of this webinar. And what does Ecuadorian law says about it? And there's an actor here that it has to be forced, and that's a part that the companies should be doing also. There's an actor that has to be forced to be part of this, because by law, the one who has to explain to the people, the one who has to ask to the people, the one who has to inform to the people is the government, is the country. That's what law says. Every time a company does it, it's doing something good, but it's doing something by law. It's not forced to do. Who is forced to be doing this is the government, and that's what the companies and the lawyers and everybody involved in the process has to force next government to do. It's the government who has the credibility in the territory. It's the government who has enough control for the information, enough control for regulation, enough control for the company's operation to people to believe in. So it's always important that the company does. I think it looks great on the paper, and it has a great impact in the community. And thankfully for the companies that are doing it right, there are communities that are coming closer to the mining projects and looking this as a good opportunity for them to develop. But there's one that has been missing in this process. That has to be forced to come, and that is the government, the local government, the Ecuadorian government. The country has to be part of this. We cannot go again and open the cadastre and make new stocks, the new bidding process to get new concessions if we as a country have no social environmental information, and if we as a country has not explained to people what is coming later. Because imagine what is happening right now. As a country, we give a concession and the company has to go deal with it alone by its own ways. And of course, every company has a different ways to do it. So I agree with them. It's great to be doing this as a company. I'm part of some of these companies working in this. But what we need to be doing also is to make government to be part of this, because by law is the one who is forced to do it. All right. And now taking it to your question, what has to change? What reforms we need? I told you a couple of them before. There's not reforms, are really new regulation. The first one, as I told you, was the previous consultation law, that we need one. It won't apply to every concession. It won't apply to every project. Constitution says when and for who it applies, but it needs to be a law to regulate it. The other one is how to make the taxes that the government is collecting from the mining companies to be a transparent, positive impact in local economics. So that's something that is not happening right now. We just joined an EITI initiative. I just invited Olivia and Adventus to become a part of it also, and hopefully they do. But the country is doing that process. It is great to be part of EITI, but again, we are doing in an international forum what the government should be doing by law. You know, one of the requirements of be part of EITI is to present and to publish all the documents related to mining sector that has impact in communities, environment, social, and everything. Well, just since 2009, the Ecuadorian law says the government has to do it. So it's great that we joined EITI. I'm a part of the initiative, and we're very happy to be. But by law, we should be doing this in 2009. So we are almost 10, 11, 12 years late to start doing this process. And to take a look at reforms, I don't think we need more than this two new laws that I already told you about. But what I really think we need to do, and we also have to force the government, the government has to be working very closely in the next 4 years, is first to have a strong frontal fight against illegal mining. This is an issue that has an enormous impact in the country. There are illegal mining in the Amazons. There are illegal mining in Esmeraldas, in Loja. There are illegal mining in Babura. I work with Hancock over here. We have a huge problem related to illegal mining in Buenos Aires, and the government hasn't been able to make a difference in that. So what we need to do for the next 4 years, the companies will do their work. Believe me, we will do it. But we need the government to start a strong armed force against illegal mining everywhere it appears. And in that process, the concession holders, the mining right holders, the companies are the first and number one line in the front, because we are the ones who told the government where this disappearing illegal mining. That's the first one. And the second one is we need the government to give enough budget for the control entities. That's a big issue here. We have to always be fighting against the agency of control for mining, and we also always have to be fighting against the environmental ministry. Both entities has not enough budget. They have not enough people. The people they do have doesn't always have the knowledge that we need, and that is something that the mining sector and the companies cannot fulfill. This is something that the next government has to notice. We need the entities of control to have enough budget to not only regulate in the technical matter, but to be side by side with the companies, because the information that the control entities will produce is the most important information that we as a company can present to the communities, because that information is not brought by us, it's brought by the government with their own people. So I don't think we need much of reforms. I think the regulation right now is quite fully. I think with tax imposition is very regular for the region. I only think we need more budget for the entities of control, and that's something that the government has to do. We need the government to make a strong force against illegal mining everywhere it appears, and we need just two laws: the law that explains and shows with transparency how the tax collection for the government is producing a favorable impact in the communities, and the previous consultation law that is something that can put us apart of the malfunctioning that they are doing right now with the popular consultation in Babura. That it didn't happen, but it did happen in Cuenca, and there's right now one that is being discussing to be approved in Quito.
All this reminds me a lot of the conversation we had with Arcom and the government. You know, both of us actually, if I remember well, in the last few years. But I mean, obviously, there's a potential here, and for the mining sector. I understand it's not a series of large laws. It's much more a question of being able to clarify the duty of each people, clarify the contours of the consulta previa, of the previous consultation. But even then, how there are companies that have invested into their communities, some more than others. I mean, you can look at Lundin, you can look at others that have really engaged with it. But how do you actually pass this information with communities themselves? I mean, we're not at the level that you see in Peru, where you have actually Cañón Minero, where the amount of royalties are being stuck there because there's no institutional framework of how to be able to disperse it for infrastructure or social projects there. But that might be an issue, if in Ecuador fairly soon, when there will be, obviously the lack of clarity Consulta Previa will continue obviously on disbursement of royalties. So how do you actually engage with communities so that they see the impact of the mining companies, and they can actually see that this can be a trigger for other economic sectors or other development that doesn't have to be on the economy? Maybe a question more for Carolina, because I'm thinking about her experience, Aurania, or our experience with other companies, maybe Fortescue, if I'm not wrong. You know, what I can make that agreement and that collaboration with companies on the daily, with the communities and companies on a daily basis.
Well, first of all, here in Ecuador, the regalias, as Stevie was explaining, when a company pays regalias that we're in exploding phase, the 60% of those regalias has to go to the local government and be invested on the communities from the direct influence area of the project. So that would be for the companies that are in an exploitation phase, okay? So it's quite different when you talk about companies that are in exploration companies. When you are in initial exploration, as you know, you have to obtain the register, the environmental register, whether if you do scout drilling or not, is an environmental register. And once you want to go through advanced exploration and do more than 30 platforms per concession, you need the license, the environmental license. So one of the things Stevie was telling, and I totally agree, is that for example, in environmental regulation, we don't need more. Okay, I agree with Steve. We can work with that with those we have now. Yeah, actually, in environmental, we are overregulated. And believe me, Planamp, my company, as you know, Remy, we work through ONGs and stuff like that for the government to create new regulations, and also advising companies, in mining companies here in Ecuador, how to apply those regulations, because there's a lot of articles and confusing articles. And believe me, we don't need any more. We already have what we need. We are overregulated. But the thing is that we have very few people. The technical team to review the environmental impact studies is up to 8 people, 9 people, no more. Mm-hmm. The ministry has no budget to hire more people. And it's not sane to think that if the Ecuador has more companies and more economical activities, the environmental ministry has to keep growing and growing. No, it's not a proportional thing, okay? So what would have to happen, at least for the mining sector, for example, if you check the index on the data in the ministry, you have more than 500 environmental impact studies for the moment being reviewed simultaneously by 8 people, okay? And approximately per environmental impact study, you have 1,000, at least 1,000 pages, because we all know how the environmental impact studies are done here in Ecuador, because you have to put everything just in case, or what you really are going to do, or what they think you're going to do, you have to write it down. So you have 1,000 pages, 500 environmental impact studies, and 8 or 9 people reviewing it, okay? And for example, the biologist and the social guy, they have to review the mining studies and also the petroleum studies. So they are divided in 2 teams. And that's because we don't have any budget to hire more people. But with this, I'm not saying that the problem is only the budget. For me, and I've been working on doing EIAs and changing the EIAs processes for more than 10 years here in Ecuador. And the problem is the system, the process, the way the environmental ministry asks you to do an environmental impact study with no, for example, social regulation here. And if you put the ICMM regulation or the protocols, they're going to comment on that because they don't even understand. So that's another thing that we have to really realize here in Ecuador. People that work in the ministries doesn't mean they have the knowledge to do it and the experience to review what we are telling them on the impact environmental studies. And as those people doesn't have budget to move to field, they are not going to visit your project ever. So how can you explain them because the ideal thing would be that that team that is reviewing your environmental impact study goes to your project, and in field you can explain them and tell them, okay, what you are reading is this, and let me explain to you. But if you take that team outside their office for 1 or 2 days to go to your project, that means the whole mining sector of the country stops for 1 or 2 days. So it would be impossible.
And that's a lack of resources from the government and the ministries and the validation of EIAs and others. But that's also symptomatic of what we see in a series of jurisdictions, and that's the case in Ecuador also, of a state which is sometimes either too present in the eyes of specific communities. I'm thinking about Pachacutic in certain areas, or a state that is not present enough in terms of infrastructure, or in terms of being able to provide for, the communities and the population, especially at times of COVID. And therefore the need for mining companies, whether or not it's relevant or normal to do so, but to step up and have a larger role in terms of social performance, in terms of engaging with communities. And I'm kind of using this also as a transition with Olivia, because we talked about, social performance and how to work, and how does Adventus work on this. How do you tackle this, your strategies in terms of sometimes fitting for a state that is not enough present, and the demands from communities on a series of investment, from social to hard investment?
Yeah, so one thing, this kind of ties into the question from the audience you mentioned before about the anti-mining use of social media. And that's going to have a lot bigger impact if there's a vacuum of information in general. And so I think in terms of best practices around social performance, I wanted to comment on a few things, all under the umbrella of, or a few tools, I guess, all under the umbrella of transparency and accountability, and using that as really the guidance in everything, in all of the strategies and all the things that we put in place. And so some of the things, just to give some examples, some of the things that we're using on our project that we've had really great success is, one of them is this a social license to operate survey that we're using Volcanic out of Australia. And they've done a lot in Australia. They're starting to do more in Latin America, but it's a third-party independent survey, and it's all anonymous. So as a company, we don't know who's being surveyed, but it allows the participants to be a lot more honest in their evaluation of our performance, what kind of benefits they're seeing, and then through a series of data analysis and incorporating not just our survey results, but other companies' results. What does that mean for our social license? Where are we on the scale of that social license? And so we've seen, that's where one of the things came out about our communication wasn't effective in the rural communities, because we had really low recognition of our programs and all of the benefits in the rural communities, but it was really high in the urban communities. And so we're adjusting our strategy based on those surveys and understanding what some of the barriers are. The other thing that we've used around improving social performance, specifically around transparency and accountability, is the IFC guidance around grievance management and making sure that our grievance mechanism is public. That's really helped us to gain credibility with our communities. It means that we're more accountable, but it also means that they're more accountable in terms of their communications with our employees and with our community relations team, and improves the trust. And then the other thing is something that you and I have talked about, which are platforms around public consultation, Bang the Table, again, out of Australia. And then, of course, you guys have your platform through Embellie, but I think they're fantastic. I would love to be able to implement that in our project, but obviously with limited communication and challenges around literacy, would have limited success. But adapting, like I mentioned before, adapting our communication strategy to the level that's there. So that on the social performance side, and then on the sustainability side, I wanted to just comment on a few things that were mentioned by Stevie. One is the local governance, and that ties into access to royalties and showing those long-term benefits, which we're seeing really low capacity in the local government. And that our team is already kind of foreshadowing that that's going to be a challenge with accessing royalties because of the way the regulation works. And the royalties go to this federal, they get paid federally, and then the regional government is supposed to apply for those royalties. And our local government is so weak, there's no way that they would ever be able to do that. And so the sustainability piece for me is not just about our project and our mine, because we're only there for 15 years. By definition, that's not sustainable. So how are they going to access those royalties? How are they going to use the money, use mining as a catalyst so that they can have sustainable economic growth that's beyond 15 years? Because we're going to go away and then they're going to say, well, now we just have a hole in the ground, and what do we have to show for it? So the local government piece, that also ties into the panel you had a couple of weeks ago, local procurement, employment, how do you build up local businesses? And then the third part of that is somehow transforming local education and bringing that to the forefront, because that's what's going to be sustainable. If we can use mining as the catalyst to change the education system and change the perceptions around education, then we're successful, I think, in having a sustainable project.
And you're making a very good point, which is a point of capacity and building capacity also for the institutional actors, or for the GADs, for example, for the different political representative, or but representative of the state that will be part of the disbursement. There's a lot of work that needs to be done there, or to support also especially in terms of the different GAD in Ecuador, being able to support their efforts into using funds or engaging with local entrepreneurship and facilitating the lessons to operate of mining projects that are on the side. There's a lot of work. I mean, I probably can reach out to, you work already within Suco, or there's a lot of work also in terms of the platform that we manage. But that's a good question also for you, Federico, and maybe I will leave you because we're already arriving at already 7 p.m. Eastern time. But what do you see in terms of not only the capacity to train communities, or to interact with the local representatives of the states or the prefects system in Ecuador? Is that something that really hampers your development at Solaris in the Warinsa project, or how do you see other above the ground risk around your project that actually can limit its capacity to develop naturally?
Thanks, Remy. Let me actually just address that question by just grabbing a little bit of the ideas that have been shared throughout the panel. And it's just sad that it has to be so short, because it's very enriching and there is a lot of information here, a lot of items that could be a panel on their own for a deeper discussion, right? Perhaps I fail of being over optimistic and perhaps at times naive, but I do feel that at this point we have a great opportunity. We have an opportunity where I'm seeing Ecuador where I saw a number of different provinces of Canada, not far behind in the 90s. Stevie was referring to, for example, the inability of regulatory entities to go and regulate and ensure that things are taking place because of the lack of monies in the fiscal to invest on people who are expertise. And yet there are a number of different states, governments that decided to rely on creativity to address those issues, such as, for example, the opportunity to create delegating authorities, such as the example of relying on professionals that can verify it and that can play a role there. And there is plenty of discussion in terms of what regulatory methods could be taking place, right, to just take advantage of all of that. But there is also a common denominator of a discussion that we've taken place. Olivia has mentioned it, Steve as well, and so Carolina, and this is the issue of royalties. And this is something that's going to have to be discussed for the next government. There's no doubt. And it goes into the essence, the heart of the main discussion. And that is that mining has not been participatory. Sorry for reinstating that topic, but it is what it is. The only reason we have people that are against mining is because they don't feel part of it. Yep. They don't see the benefit. They just see a flare around. Just what Olivia was mentioning. They see just actually something left there, and they just feel like they have really benefited from there. And the policies that are right now in place are in such a way that that the resources stay in the main cities. They don't trickle down all the way to the small towns. I will invite you to actually just, if you follow Twitter, to take a look at the Alianza para la Innovación y Empoderamiento, AEI, AIE, yeah, I guess. Yeah. And they promoted a debate with both candidates. One has occurred last Sunday, and there was an interview with Lasso, and one is happening at 10:30 p.m. This Sunday with Mr. Arauz. In both of them, both candidates have been interviewed in relation to the mining sector and have provided some elements. But the key discussion has been right there. What's going on with the royalties? How are people going to benefit? And this is a clear indication. And it doesn't take rocket science here. It's not too complicated. You trickle down that. You make communities feel, and you empower them to be participating in these processes and rely and actually understand that having a mine as a neighbor provides them security, interdependence of other resources, opportunities for development, opportunities for education. It will come, right? But that's the obligation of mining itself. And this is actually where we can really validate ourselves in Ecuador. So I leave myself quite optimistic because I do see that happening in terms of the interest and the approach. We've been very lucky to have a community that has taken that message, that has owned it, that has realized the power that they have over the project, over the opportunity they have for themselves, right? And yes, we did an exercise of ensuring that would happen. And the team was phenomenal in ensuring that actually that was very clear and we were transparent, and great guidance, such as people like Carolina and Stevie and other specialists were able to actually just provide us the right element of approach so that actually the community would feel and is part of this whole process. We created a board of directors where the community has a say in our activities and has the ability to provide us feedback on whether they're happy or not on what they've been provided. We translate technical documentation that is usually called in the technical world 43101s. And good luck reading a 43101. I fall asleep on the second page. But like, imagine that being re-given to community to understand what is the mineral protection that is out there. Why do we have to? And I don't think this is intentional. It's just part of the essence of the of the sector that has been left to a very secluded group of people, either investors or geologists. And now we just need to go down.
And maybe to wrap it up, I mean, if I try to just put all our thoughts together, I mean, we talked a lot of, obviously, water is a key issue in Ecuador, and it's always going to be there in terms of mining. But we talked about inclusion, need for including, other populations so they actually can see the benefit from them, and that's really not the case in Ecuador. There's a lack of communication and a lack of transparency on the sector, or at least building on decades where it was a key problem under past administration, especially. I mean, it's no secret that we talk regularly with very prominent anti-mining voices in Ecuador, and when we discuss, it's really again on water transparency and inclusion. And there's a case for the sector to actually be able to make that case, give best practices, showcase maybe on the platforms that we mentioned. Either it's or different structures such as a trust and a board of directors with communities, and you actually can show, the element of how decision making is shared. Obviously not on the complete project, but on some elements of the impact that it has on territory. Then there's a case that can be made also to very prominent voices at anti-mining that will be there for the next administration, whoever wins between Arauz and Lasso. We know it's going to be a fair, more or less pro-mining administration with key issues such as financial means, such as question of royalties, but there also needs to be the case made of building capacities, of showing, communicating better the best practices, and of making the case of how these can be tied into a series of ideas, which is close to the idea of elements that Pachakutik or different movements believe in, which is much more, relation with nature, circular economy, localization, building our local content, that would be very important for limiting the potential conflictivity, especially on some key projects in Ecuador. I just wanted to mention, I'm wrapping this up, I know we've done on touch of many issues, and that's the problem when you do a country analysis. If you want to go deeper on issues of relation with indigenous communities, on community consent, on local content, on human modern slavery or working conditions in the mining sector following the Modern Slavery Act of the UK, we've done specific webinar dedicated to this on a theme by theme. So I'm more than happy to share those informations, and I'm looking forward to seeing obviously the result of the election, but more than this, more relevant, how some key projects that are in the pipeline in Ecuador will be able to make the case for, that inclusion into the future of the country and generate some very much needed economic development in a country facing COVID now more than many other countries. So I hope this was kind of a good source of information and a good debate for some of the people that were listening. I really want to thank Olivia, Carolina, Stevie, and Federico for being with me tonight. I got the pleasure of being able to invite my friends that I can't see because of COVID as often as I would like to just come to my living room and discuss about Ecuador, Peru, and Ghana and other countries. Our next country analysis will be Peru for the next election, and then we'll look at Ghana specifically for the month of June. So stay with us, and thank you very much again for being here. I wish you a very good Easter to all of you, especially my co-panelists. Cheers, guys.
Thank you for having us. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, guys.
Bye.
Bye.
Gracias. Ciao.